It all started with a simple curiosity, a curiosity that almost cost me my life. It was late one night, and I was sitting alone in my apartment in New York City, scrolling through Reddit, when I stumbled upon a post that caught my eye. The title simply read, "The Dark Web. You have no idea what you're getting into." I had heard of the dark web before, of course. The infamous, hidden part of the internet where illegal things supposedly happen. Drugs, weapons, untraceable services, things you only read about in news stories. But I'd never really believed it was as dangerous as people made it out to be. After all, I had always prided myself on being tech-savvy. My name's Adam, by the way, and I'm not your typical guy who jumps into risky situations without thinking. But this was different. The post was a detailed account from someone who had accidentally wandered into the dark web. Their story was chilling. Yet, the more I read, the more I found myself intrigued. They claimed that the things they saw online were far worse than anything you could imagine. It was like a drug, a deep pull on my curiosity that I couldn't resist. The post included a set of links. As a person who had worked in IT for years, I knew the risks, but something in me wanted to see for myself. I wasn't scared. I thought, I can handle this. I used a VPN, of course, and downloaded the Tor browser, just like they said. I thought I was being careful. But as soon as I clicked the link, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. The screen loaded slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. And then it was there. A dark interface. Pages with no titles, just strange strings of letters and numbers. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, feeling an odd mix of fascination and unease. I couldn't see anything clearly, but I felt like I was standing at the edge of something that wasn't meant to be seen. I clicked on a random link, a simple forum. The forum was called The Hidden Truth. It was filled with bizarre posts about unsolved crimes, conspiracy theories, and strange, often cryptic discussions. The more I scrolled, the more unsettled I became. Some of the messages didn't even make sense, but there was a certain tone to them. A dark, foreboding feeling that made me realize I was no longer in a place where people were just having conversations. I was in a place where things were happening. Then I saw it. Post titled, "You're Being Watched." It was just a few lines long, but they struck me with an intensity one can't describe. The user, whose name was Hollowman, warned anyone reading the post to leave the dark web immediately. He claimed to have seen people marked for death simply for accessing certain pages. He said that the dark web was a place where real horrors came to life. The kind of stuff the media didn't dare report. I laughed it off at first. Yeah, right. Just some scared guy trying to freak people out. But then I noticed something. I checked the timestamp on the post. It was from 2 minutes ago. I thought I was being cautious, but when I looked up from the screen, I noticed something strange. My computer wasn't acting right. The mouse moved on its own, clicking through pages. I froze. The paranoia set in fast. I quickly closed the browser and disconnected from the internet, but something inside me knew that I had done something I shouldn't have. That night, I didn't sleep. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. It was a constant pressure in the back of my mind, a gnawing sensation that never quite went away. Every time I checked my phone or my laptop, I had this strange thought that maybe someone was tracking my every move, just waiting for the right moment to strike. But that was impossible, right? I had taken precautions, used a VPN, encrypted my data. I was smart enough to stay anonymous. Or at least I thought I was. It wasn't until a week later that things took a turn for the worse. I woke up one morning to find an email in my inbox. It was from an unknown address, just a jumble of letters and numbers, nothing that could identify who sent it. First, I figured it was spam, but as I opened it, my blood ran cold. The subject line simply said, "We know you." I clicked the email open, and there, in the body of the message, was a single line of text. "Don't think you're safe." No attachments, no links. Just those words, staring back at me. I scanned the rest of the email, looking for anything that could give me a clue as to who was behind it, but there was nothing. No trace, no IP address, no way to track it. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just a prank, a coincidence, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, As I sat in my apartment, I heard something, a faint tapping, like someone gently knocking on the door. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. I slowly got up and checked the peephole. Nothing, but the knocking continued, more insistent now. My pulse raced, and my hands were shaking as I slowly unlocked the door, expecting to find nothing at all. But when I opened it, there was a single package on the doorstep, wrapped in brown paper. No return address. Nothing. I picked it up with trembling hands and brought it inside, carefully unwrapping it. Inside, there was a small black box. Nothing remarkable about it, just an ordinary box with a faint smell of metal, like it had been sitting in a basement for years. There was no note, no explanation, just the box itself. My first instinct was to toss it in the trash, but something held me back. A deep curiosity that pulled me closer to it. I didn't even know why I felt compelled to open it, but I did. I carefully pried open the lid. Inside, I found a USB drive. It was so simple, yet something about it screamed danger. I should have thrown it away right then and there, but instead, I plugged it into my computer. What happened next is something I will never be able to forget. The screen flickered for a moment before a video popped up. It wasn't anything extraordinary, just a plain, black screen with text that read, "Watch the full video or else." The text sent a chill down my spine. Who was behind this? What did they want from me? But the curiosity took over again, and against my better judgment, I clicked play. The video started, showing nothing but a dimly lit room. It looked like a basement or maybe a warehouse. In the center of the room, there was a single chair. It was empty at first, but then the camera shifted slightly, and a figure slowly appeared in the frame. It was a man, or at least I think it was. His face was obscured by a mask, a plain white mask, featureless and smooth. He was sitting in the chair, his body motionless. The camera zoomed in closer, and I felt my breath catch in my throat when I saw his hands. They were bound. But what really made my stomach turn was the mark on his arm. A strange symbol that looked like nothing I had ever seen before. It was etched into his skin, deep and raw, like something done with a hot iron. I leaned closer to the screen, unable to look away. Then the man spoke, his voice muffled, but clear enough for me to hear. "This is what happens when you dig too deep." Before I could process what was happening, the screen went black. The last thing I saw was a string of numbers, coordinates, I think, scrolling across the screen. I sat there in shock for a long time, my mind racing. What had I just watched? Who was that man? And why had they sent this to me? I unplugged the USB drive and threw it across the room, my heart racing. But deep down, I knew I wasn't going to escape whatever this was. The moment I clicked that link, I had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. I was already too deep. The next few days passed in a haze of paranoia. I couldn't get the image of that video out of my head, and I kept seeing that strange symbol in my mind's eye. The man in the chair, his bound hands, those numbers scrolling across the screen. Something about it felt like a warning, like a countdown. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had triggered something I wasn't supposed to. It was impossible to focus on anything. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Every time I left my apartment, I felt eyes on me. In the streets, on the subway, in the coffee shop. Everywhere I went, I thought someone was following me. I started to see shadows out of the corner of my eye, people who weren't there when I looked directly at them. I didn't know if I was losing my mind or if something far more sinister was happening. Then one night it happened. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. Groggy and disoriented, I reached for it. The screen was cracked. The battery was nearly dead, but I saw a message notification. It was from an unknown number. "You're in danger. Stop looking." I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. There was no name, no identifying information, just those words. The message was followed by another one, sent moments later. "You don't know what you've unleashed. Leave the city." My hands trembled as I typed a response. "Who is this?" The reply came back almost instantly. "We are everywhere." I felt like the walls were closing in on me. There was no way this could be a coincidence. I had seen the warning signs, but now it was clear. This wasn't just some prank. It was real. The next morning, I received an envelope. It was plain, with no return address, just my name written in neat handwriting on the front. My hands shook as I opened it, afraid of what I might find. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper, the type of paper that felt old and worn, like it had been handled by many hands over the years. There were no words, just a picture, a photograph of me, taken from across the street. I could tell it was recent because I had just left my apartment a few minutes earlier that morning. The photo was grainy, but it was unmistakable. I stood on the sidewalk, wearing my usual jacket, looking straight ahead. But what caught my attention wasn't the photo, it was the figure standing in the background. A man. He was almost entirely out of focus, but his eyes were unmistakable. He was staring directly at the camera. At me. I felt my pulse spike. This wasn't a coincidence. I had been watched for days, maybe longer. This wasn't just some weird coincidence or random prank. It was deliberate. They were waiting for me. Then the phone rang. I stared at the screen. No number, just the word unknown, flashing on the caller ID. My finger hovered over the screen, but I hesitated. I couldn't answer. What if it was them? What if they were on the other side of the line? After a long moment, I reluctantly pressed decline. But just before I could put the phone down, another message came through. The same unknown number. You're being hunted. Leave the city before it's too late. I started to feel like I was suffocating. My apartment felt like a prison. I couldn't go outside without feeling watched. I couldn't escape this constant, gnawing sense of dread. I had dug too deep, and now it felt like something was coming for me. But what? Who were these people or whatever they were? I had to find out. I had to know. I logged back into the dark web, unable to resist the pull. My fingers moved mechanically, typing in the address I had used before. The page loaded slower than usual, and I couldn't help but feel a rush of nausea as the familiar dark interface appeared before me. This time, I didn't just scroll. I searched. I searched for everything I could about Holloman. I scoured forums, dug through obscure threads, and pieced together fragmented information. That's when I found something that made my blood run cold. Post. A thread buried deep within the pages of the dark web. It wasn't a warning this time. It was a story. A true story. It was someone else's account of their experience with the same group of people. The post was titled, "I Survived the Hunt." The user, a man named Jackson Ford, claimed to have been targeted by the same group I had unknowingly stumbled upon. He wrote about a ritualistic game where people were hunted, one by one, by the faceless figures lurking in the shadows. Jackson described a twisted game that went beyond the bounds of human decency. Participants were watched, followed, and hunted until they either escaped or were eliminated. The worst part? He said there was no way out. Once you're in their sights, you are theirs. And there was no escape from the game. As I read the post, something inside me snapped. I knew deep down that I was no longer just a passive observer. I had become a part of it. And now they were coming for me too. Suddenly, a new message popped up on my screen. "You've been marked." I froze. And then, almost immediately, the screen went black. Something moved in the corner of my vision. A figure just outside my window. I wasn't alone anymore. And this time, I had no idea how to get out. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I kept hearing noises outside my apartment. Scratching sounds at the window, the faint echo of footsteps in the hallways. Every time I looked out, there was nothing. Just the empty, quiet streets of the city. But I knew I wasn't imagining things. They were out there, watching, waiting. The next morning, I woke up to a missed call on my phone. The number was blocked, the same as all the others. I didn't answer, but this time there was a voicemail. My hands shook as I clicked to listen. The message was short, and it was chilling in its simplicity. "You've made a mistake, Adam. We'll be seeing you soon." That was all. No static, no background noise, just the message. My name. The sound of my own breathing was the only thing that followed. I couldn't stay in my apartment any longer. If they were coming for me, I needed to get out of the city. I grabbed what I could, my wallet, my phone, a few clothes, and I bolted. I didn't even take the time to pack properly. I just had to go. I hailed a cab and instructed the driver to take me as far away from my apartment as possible. But the entire ride, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was still being watched. Every time I glanced out of the cab window, I thought I saw figures in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the streetlights. Figures that seemed to be following us, tracking every turn. I asked the driver to take a different route, anything to throw them off, but it didn't help. I could feel them closing in on me, the weight of their gaze pressing down on me, suffocating me. I was being hunted. We finally arrived at a small motel on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't much, just a rundown place with flickering neon lights and peeling paint. But it was far enough out of the city that I thought I could lay low for a while. Or so I thought. The moment I entered my room, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The room was dim, the air stale, but something felt off. The first thing I did was lock the door and pull the curtains shut. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned on the TV, mostly to drown out the silence, but when I glanced at the screen, I froze. The static flickered for a moment, and then the image came into focus. It was me. The screen showed a grainy black and white image of my motel room, taken from outside. I could see the window in the background, the very same one I was sitting near. The camera angle was from the street, so it was impossible for me to have seen the person who was watching. There was no mistaking it. They were already here. I grabbed my phone and tried to call the police, but as soon as I dialed 911, the call was interrupted. A new message appeared on the screen, flashing for a split second. "We own you now." My heart pounded in my chest. I was no longer a person. I was prey. This wasn't just some game anymore. It was real, and it was happening to me. I bolted out of the motel room, without thinking, my legs moving faster than I ever thought possible. I had to get out. I had to find somewhere safe. But every step I took, I felt them closing in. The sounds of footsteps were behind me, always just a little too far to reach, but never too far to be heard. I ran for what felt like hours, my lungs burning, my heart pounding. I found myself on an empty highway with no cars, no people, just the highway stretching out in front of me like a never-ending road to nowhere. And then I saw it, a car, a black SUV, parked at the side of the road, its headlights off. It was completely still, but I could sense something in it, someone waiting. I hesitated, unsure if it was another trap. But the fear of being caught, of being trapped forever, was too much. I approached the vehicle cautiously, as quietly as I could. Suddenly, the door opened. The figure stepped out, but it wasn't who I expected. It was the same man from the video, the one with the mask. I froze, my body paralyzed with fear. He didn't speak, but his eyes, those cold, hollow eyes, never left mine. He stepped toward me slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, trapped in the nightmare that I had created for myself. And then, without warning, the world around me went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I woke up, I was no longer on the highway. I was in a different place, cold, damp, and the air smelled of decay. The room I was in was pitch black, and I could hear faint, muffled sounds coming from somewhere deep within the walls. My body ached, but there was something else that felt even worse. The oppressive silence. The realization that I was completely alone, completely trapped. And that's when I heard a voice. It was soft at first, a whisper that sent a chill down my spine. "Welcome to the game, Adam." I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't even fighting. I had already lost. I had no idea how long I'd been there, in that cold, suffocating darkness. Hours? Days? It was impossible to tell. The silence was all-encompassing, broken only by the occasional drip of water from somewhere deeper in the shadows. Every inch of my body screamed in agony from the position I was in, but my mind was far worse. The dread, the feeling of being hunted, that insidious thought gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. It was all-consuming. I tried to move, to call out, but my throat felt dry, my limbs unresponsive. The only thing I could do was sit there, in the darkness, and wait for whatever came next. I kept thinking of my family, my friends, anyone who might have been worried about me, but I couldn't reach them. I was beyond their reach now, and then I heard it. Footsteps, soft at first, but growing louder with each passing moment. A slow, deliberate rhythm, like someone was walking toward me, enjoying the fact that I was trapped, that I was powerless. The footsteps stopped just outside the door to the room, and I could feel the temperature in the air drop. I wasn't alone anymore. The door creaked open. I couldn't see anything, no figure, no shape, no outline. Just an overwhelming sense of presence. It was as if the darkness itself had come to life, a weight pressing down on me, a tangible, suffocating force. I held my breath, praying that whatever this was would just go away. But it didn't. The air seemed to vibrate with tension. And then, out of the blackness, a voice spoke. "You've been chosen." The words were like ice, freezing me in place. I wanted to scream, to fight, but I couldn't. My body refused to obey. All I could do was listen. "This is where your journey ends," the voice continued, a low whisper that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "The game doesn't stop until you're no longer part of it. And you, Adam, have no choice but to play." I wanted to speak, to ask what was going on, to beg for an explanation, but the words stuck in my throat. I felt a pressure around my chest, as if someone was squeezing the life out of me, slowly. The voice came again, but this time it was closer. "You wanted to know what happens when you go too far. Now you'll find out." The last thing I remember was the sharp flash of light, blinding, searing light, flooding the room before everything went black again. When I woke up this time, I wasn't in the same place. I was standing. The room was different, too. It was huge, like a cavern or an underground hall, dimly lit by flickering lights hanging from rusted chains. The walls were covered in strange symbols, scrawled hastily in red paint, almost as if someone had been desperately trying to communicate something. There was a metallic smell in the air, thick and suffocating. I wasn't alone. I looked around and saw them. Figures, masked and silent, standing in the shadows, watching me. Their eyes glinted from behind their masks, cold and calculating. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They just watched. The room was full of them. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I tried to backtrack, but every movement I made was mirrored by them. Every step I took, they moved with me. I was surrounded, trapped, and then I heard a voice again. This time it wasn't from behind me. It came from above, as if someone was speaking from a distant balcony. "You've made it this far, but there is no escape." It was the same voice, that cold, unnerving voice. It echoed through the cavern, bouncing off the walls, amplifying the terror that gripped me. "This is the point of no return. You must play the game, Adam. You will be hunted, you will be tested, and you will either survive or perish." Suddenly, the room was filled with sound, mechanical whirring, the hiss of steam, the grinding of gears. A massive door on the far side of the room creaked open. Out stepped a new figure. This one wasn't masked. This one was real, and he was holding something, a weapon, a long, curved knife, gleaming with a cold, unnatural shine. He stepped forward slowly, the others moving aside as he advanced. I could barely breathe. My heart felt like it was about to explode out of my chest. The knife glinted in his hand as he came closer. "Run," he said simply, his voice deep and emotionless. Without thinking, my legs moved. My body moved on its own, adrenaline surging through my veins as I sprinted toward the opposite door. But as I reached for the handle, I felt something, a cold, sharp sensation along my back. I didn't need to look. I already knew what had happened. I was already marked. The game had begun. The hunt had started, and I was its prey. Every step I took, every breath I drew, was a desperate fight for survival. But I couldn't escape. There was no way out. And as I ran, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, growing closer. It was no longer just one person hunting me. It was all of them. They were coming for me. The only question now was whether I could survive long enough to escape, or if I would become another part of their twisted game. The cold air sliced through me as I ran, every footstep echoing off the stone walls around me. The sound of my own breath was all I could hear, ragged and desperate. But I could feel them. They were behind me, closing in, tracking every move I made. There was no escape. There was no safe place to run. The door I had tried to open earlier had slammed shut behind me, and now I had no choice but to press forward. I turned sharply down a narrow hallway, its walls covered in grime and peeling paint. The flickering lights overhead made everything feel like a bad dream, too surreal to be real. I ran, never looking back, but I could hear the footsteps behind me. The rhythm was steady, deliberate. They weren't running, but they didn't need to. They were playing the long game, and I was the one running out of time. I pushed through a heavy steel door at the end of the hallway and found myself outside, on a narrow ledge. The world below me was pitch black, the ground impossible to see. I had no idea where I was or how far I had fallen into whatever hell I had entered. All I knew was that if I stayed out here too long, I'd be trapped. Open air, no way out. And that's when I heard it, a sound like a low growl. It echoed from below, deep and rumbling, as though something large, something unnatural, was coming for me. My heart skipped a beat. The sound grew louder, closer. Something was coming for me, and I knew it wasn't human. I quickly backed away from the edge, my eyes scanning the shadows, trying to spot any sign of movement. But the world was too quiet, too still, except for that noise. The growl. It's not real. This isn't real. You have to keep moving. My mind screamed, but my legs were starting to give out. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't rested since I'd been dragged into this nightmare. Every muscle in my body was exhausted, but my survival instinct kept me going. As I moved further into the structure, the sound of growling followed me. It wasn't just one creature anymore. I could hear multiple footsteps, multiple growls, coming from all directions. And then I saw them. The figures from earlier, masked, tall, humanoid, but they weren't the ones I had to worry about anymore. No, what stood behind them were the creatures. They were like shadows in the darkness. Tall, hulking figures, with eyes that burned like coals, their faces contorted in ways that no human should ever experience. Their teeth were jagged, yellowed, and sharp. And as they emerged from the darkness, I could see the blood dripping from their claws. These weren't just hunters. They were predators. I stumbled backward, my breath coming faster, more panicked. One of the creatures hissed and lunged, and I barely dodged it in time. My heart thudded in my chest as I ran, blindly, desperately, through the maze of corridors, the walls closing in around me. The growls, the sounds of their footsteps, were growing louder, relentless. There was nowhere left to go. I turned a corner, gasping for breath, and suddenly I was face to face with another one of the figures. This time, a man, dressed in black, his mask cold and emotionless. He held out a hand to stop me from going any further. "You can't escape," he said in a flat, emotionless voice. His tone was almost bored, like he had seen this countless times before. "You were never meant to. The game is in motion, Adam. It's too late to change the rules now." I tried to push past him, but he grabbed me by the wrist with an unnerving strength. His grip was like iron, and I could feel the cold, unnatural chill of his hand seep into my skin. "You're going to die here," he whispered, his words sending a cold shiver down my spine. "And you'll be forgotten, like the rest." I tried to break free, but it was no use. The creature that had been chasing me had caught up. It was only a few feet behind, its hungry eyes focused solely on me. I felt a surge of panic. I could feel the weight of death closing in, inch by inch. I wasn't going to make it. I wasn't going to survive. The fear that had taken over me when I first entered the game had now fully engulfed me. I was no longer fighting to escape. I was fighting to hold on to any shred of humanity I had left. But the man in front of me didn't let go. In one swift motion, He slammed me against the wall, his hand tightening around my wrist, forcing me to face the monstrous creature that was slowly approaching. "This is how it ends," he said coldly, like it was the most inevitable thing in the world. I didn't know if it was my mind breaking or if I was hallucinating, but I suddenly saw the face of the creature. It wasn't just a monster. It was human. It had the twisted face of someone who had been turned into something else, something beyond the pale of reason. But then, a shift happened. In the distance, a scream, a shout, a voice. Someone else had entered the game. And just like that, the creature stopped, turning its head toward the sound. It hesitated, and in that split second, I felt the grip on my wrist loosen. I twisted free and bolted. My feet pounded against the stone, my chest tight with fear and adrenaline. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going down without a fight. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. My legs burned with exhaustion, but the fear pushing me forward was stronger. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The creature was still behind me, and I knew that if I let my guard down for even a second, it would be the last thing I ever did. I rounded another corner, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something that gave me a glimmer of hope. An exit. A narrow, steel door at the end of the hallway, cracked slightly open, a faint light spilling from the other side. I didn't care what was on the other side. It was a way out, and that's all I needed. But as I reached for the door handle, something cold wrapped around my ankle. I stumbled, crashing to the floor, the sharp sting of pain shooting through my body. I looked down, and my heart stopped. One of the creatures had caught me. Its claws dug deep into my skin, pulling me back toward it with a strength that no human should possess. I tried to scream, tried to kick, but the grip was unrelenting. I could feel the creature's breath, hot and rancid, against my neck. My mind screamed for me to fight, to get away, but my body was failing me. And then, just as the creature was about to pull me into the shadows, I heard a voice. "Adam." I looked up, dazed and disoriented, and saw a figure standing at the other end of the hallway. It was a man, no, a woman, I realized as she came into focus. She was wearing a black hoodie, her face obscured by a mask, but the way she moved was familiar. She stepped forward, her presence commanding the attention of everything in the room. The creature hesitated, its grip on me loosening. "Let him go," she said, her voice cold and authoritative. The creature growled but didn't advance. It was as though it recognized her voice, obeyed her command without question. The woman walked toward me slowly, deliberately, and in that moment, I realized that she wasn't trying to save me. She was one of them. But why was she helping me? "You're not like the others," I gasped, my voice barely a whisper. She knelt down beside me, her eyes cold behind the mask, and said, "I was once in your position. I survived. And now I'm here to offer you a choice." My heart raced. A choice? What choice? There was no way out. There couldn't be. She grabbed my wrist, pulling me up with surprising strength. "You can run. You can leave. But you'll never truly escape. Not from them. Not from the game." I was confused, my mind struggling to comprehend her words. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, as though she were deciding whether or not to tell me the truth. "The game doesn't end until you're claimed. But there's a way to survive, just one way. If you accept the offer, if you agree to play by their rules, you can walk away. You'll be free. But you'll have to leave everything behind. You won't remember who you are, who you were." I stared at her in disbelief. "You want me to forget? To become one of them?" She nodded slowly. "The price of survival is your humanity. The moment you decide to leave, you're no longer Adam. You're one of us, and you will be a part of the game forever. You will become the hunter, not the hunted." My blood ran cold as her words sank in. There was no way out. There was no escape. To survive, I would have to become something else, something unrecognizable. And yet, something deep inside me wanted to take that offer. It was the only way I could survive. "Make your choice," she said, her voice hard and final. I looked at the exit door, then at the creatures who still lingered in the shadows, waiting. There was no time left. The game would not wait for me to make up my mind. I swallowed hard. I thought about my life, my family, everything I'd ever known. And I knew in that moment that I couldn't leave it all behind. Not for this. I stood up, shaking with fear, and took a step back. I won't do it, I said, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my chest. I won't play their game. I'd rather die than become like you. The woman stared at me, her eyes unreadable. She didn't say anything at first. She just nodded slowly, as if she had known all along what I would choose. But as I turned to make a run for the door, I heard her voice one last time. Then you'll die, Adam. You'll die and you'll never be found. I reached the door and flung it open, stepping into the blinding light beyond. And as I ran, I heard them coming. The creatures, the hunters, the figures in the shadows. They were closing in, faster than I could run. I could feel them on my heels, their claws scratching the stone, their growls filling the air. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me. But I knew, deep down, that there was no escaping. There was no safe place, no way out. And as the darkness closed in behind me, I made peace with the fact that I had lost. The game had claimed me. I don't know if anyone will ever find this. Maybe no one will ever know what happened to me. But if you're reading this, if you find this somewhere, take my warning. Stay away from the dark web. There are things down there that you don't understand. Things that will hunt you, break you, and eventually make you one of them. Once you're in, there is no escaping. And no one ever leaves.